Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Wrestler's Wrestlers, The Masters of the Craft of Professional Wrestling, by Dan Murphy and Bryan Young, narrated by Joe Hempel. Forward. Politics, religion, professional wrestling. These are three different forms of artistic belief systems, all of which are powered by the charisma and persuasiveness of their practitioners. All three disciplines seek to define good and evil for the masses based upon what they feel will satisfy their core audience, while ultimately empowering and enriching themselves. This means that they must pick an enemy against which to rally their chosen troops and faithful, intentionally or not. The result is never less than controversial, much like the picks for the wrestlers' wrestlers. As a child, I grew up watching the wrestling presented by the Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, and Florida promotions in the early to late 1970s. When my family traveled or vacationed outside of those areas, I eagerly consumed whatever the local wrestling promotion presented. I was often left scratching my head in bewilderment. Seeing wrestlers who I'd read about in magazines, often making them my favorite wrestler du jour, based upon the exciting, often apocryphal editorial spin, I was disappointed. They seemed somehow different and less exciting than I imagined. Occasionally, I would see a wrestler that had moved on from my home base and ask myself, what the hell happened to them? Alternately, a wrestler I was underwhelmed by on vacation would show up in one of the three wrestling promotions I consumed and be a ball of fire. A new kid to my neighborhood from the Midwest would tell me how shitty the tag team of Ric Flair and Greg Valentine were compared to Crusher and Dick the Bruiser, while laying out a convincing argument. The recounting of his truth didn't jibe with my experience, yet it was as passionate as my own opinion. Huh? Hence my first encounter with cognitive dissonance. After Vince McMahon Jr. bought the WWF from his father and went into sports entertainment mode, he would eventually sign up most of the performers I grew up on and turn them into cartoons. I was outraged. Why must Harley Race be a king and wear a crown? Why is Dory Funk Jr. now called Hoss? Why does everybody have a goofy nickname and silly vignettes? Why was a tag team I could always count on for heavy bloodshed and violence now acting like goofs hired to perform at a child's birthday party? Why is Bobby Heenan letting Gorilla Monsoon outsmart him every week? Moreover, why did every promotion at the time begin to do the same thing, usually in an embarrassing attempt to follow the trend? The flip side is that there are millions of fans that would be bored out of their skulls looking at their favorite performers doing what used to appeal to my generation. It would be many years before I realized that every territory had a different style to suit its demographic, and many wrestlers had to adapt to get over. They weren't dumbing it down, they were doing what was required to make money at the time. When they came back home, they were always working the style that drew money there. An entertainer must entertain. It's a bonus and an honor when his professional colleagues concur with the fans' opinions. Eventually, I became involved in the wrestling biz, and I had the opportunity to talk to many of my childhood heroes at length. I got their perspectives on my youthful remembrances. They often conceded that something that had got over or drew money was garbage from a technical standpoint. Whether I agreed with them or not, they knew whereof they spoke. Their different perspectives made me look at things in an entirely different way, as many of those listening to this book may. It's pretty easy to separate the legit tough guys from the entertainers and the spot monkeys. Some folks prefer one over the others. Some wrestlers are at least two or all three, and I believe that is the ideal mix in today's environment. Box office is easy to quantify, but the emotional connection is up to the individual to decide. So there is always an X factor. This book will give you excellent insight from those who have taken the bumps, put up with the politics, and lived to tell about it. Deciding upon whom to vote for in politics, worship in your faith, or cheer in pro wrestling is usually a deeply personal, emotional choice. Unlike the former two, your choice of the wrestler's wrestler won't harm anyone. Let the spirited debates begin. The Sinister Minister, James Mitchell. Introduction. Professional wrestling is a form of entertainment that defies clear classification. To some, it's a low-brow burlesque, a farce aping a legitimate athletic contest. To others, it's a morality play pitting heroes against villains in a simulated, made-for-TV battle, a well-choreographed exhibition of athletic feats, tumbles, falls, and false finishes designed to make a spectator sit on the edge of his seat. In recent years, some pro wrestlers have even taken to calling their unique vocation a performance art, a term which still rankles some old-timers and purists who spent their careers, and in many cases much of their lives, keeping kayfabe or protecting the business, and doing anything in their power to maintain an air of credibility around the spectacle. Breaking kayfabe could get a wrestler fined, fired, or blackballed from the industry completely. For more than a century and a half now, professional wrestling has been revered and ridiculed, had its ups and downs, been both sideshow and center stage. But through it all, it has survived and still gains new fans every generation. Fans of all ages, races, genders, and socioeconomic backgrounds love professional wrestling. Yes, all but the most innocent or naive fans know that wrestling is a work, a fight with a scripted outcome. WWE CEO Vince McMahon testified as much himself in 1989 when he told the New Jersey State Senate that pro wrestling was entertainment, not an athletic competition, to get out from under the thumb of the various state athletic commissions. Today, anyone with access to YouTube can find hundreds of shoot videos where all of wrestling's inner secrets, the ones that were guarded so passionately during the kayfabe-fearing territory days, are exposed for the world to see. Yet fans are still willing to suspend their disbelief, to buy in on the illusion, to passionately follow storylines and argue their points of view on various social media platforms. Why? Wrestling is a lot like magic in a way. We in the audience know the woman isn't being sawed in half, yet we hold our breath until she steps out of the box in one piece. But good professional wrestling operates on another level as well, by making its fans become emotionally involved with not only the show or match, but the personalities themselves. To accomplish this, or get over, a wrestler has to be part superhero, supervillain, part athlete, part actor, part storyteller, and part magician. And a select few have something extra, something that makes them stand out from the pack. These special few are what we call a wrestler's wrestler. Ironically, being a wrestler's wrestler involves more than just pure technical wrestling proficiency. It's more than just being able to take down an opponent and turn their shoulders to the mat. And, as wrestling has evolved from a carnival sideshow attraction to a billion-dollar sports entertainment spectacle, the definition of what constitutes a wrestler's wrestler has evolved as well, though perhaps not as much as one might expect. So, exactly what does it take to be considered a wrestler's wrestler? A wrestler's wrestler. The criteria. A wrestler's wrestler is a competitor who has earned the respect of his peers in the locker room for his dedication, professionalism, work ethic, and mastery of the craft of professional wrestling. To compile this book, we turned to the wrestlers themselves. We interviewed more than 50, representing more than a half-century of experience in the business. After all, who can better identify a wrestler's wrestler than the wrestlers themselves? These are the men who have dedicated their lives to the art of professional wrestling. Writers, historians, fans, and others may have their own opinions, but as much as possible we went straight to the experts and asked a series of wrestlers who they most admired and considered to be the true wrestlers' wrestlers. Some writers and historians were willing to add their expert perspective as well. We also relied heavily on the written words and primary sources left from wrestlers who have passed, such as Lou Thesz's seminal book, Hooker. Thesz may have pulled his punches in the ring, but he certainly held nothing back in his autobiography. This book is an opportunity for the wrestlers themselves to define the term, to tell their stories and to discuss who they feel are the wrestlers who deserve recognition. This book is not intended to be solely for the fans and historians, but it is also for the boys. It is our attempt to preserve an oral history straight from the sources, a unique insight to this business told by those who lived and continue to live it. It is an attempt to recognize the masters of the craft of wrestling from a wrestler's perspective, It is an attempt to recognize the masters of the craft of wrestling from a wrestler's perspective, while maintaining the objectivity of an outsider. Naturally, if you ask multiple wrestlers their opinion on a given wrestler, you're going to get a wide range of responses. After all, old grudges die hard. And, as it is with actors, musicians, and artists, taste is subjective. The responses we received were varied. Some wrestlers identified a true wrestler's wrestler as the one who was able to draw the biggest crowds and make the most money. They were the ones who brought the fans into the buildings night after night. If that was the sole criterion, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Bruno Sammartino might be our Mount Rushmore. Others talked about the carpenters, the undercard craftsmen whose job was to make their opponents look like $1,000,000. And others named wrestlers who had the skill, the athleticism, and the technical ability, but simply never got the proper push because they weren't in the right place at the right time. After all, you can't build a good house without good carpenters. The phrase, a wrestler's wrestler, I think, stems from the term, a comic's comic, said Colt Cabana, a former NWA heavyweight champion who has dabbled in stand-up comedy. The comic's comic may not be the best comic as far as a money-making tour, but all the other comics will be in the back of the room watching him because they have to watch him. He's that good. A wrestler's wrestler. The wrestlers in the back will always have to watch that person's matches because they really appreciate the nuances of their wrestling. A wrestler's wrestler is someone who is able to engage the crowd and can blend with any other wrestler in their style, offered Sin Bodhi, who wrestled as Kizarny in WWE. A wrestler's wrestler can be put in the ring with just about anyone and make a good match. It's someone who's able to direction change. Say you and I both go into a match planning on working the arm, but then you sprain your ankle when you hop over the rope into the ring, Bodhi continued. Well, if you just hurt your leg, it wouldn't make any sense for me to work your arm. We have to be able to change direction based on what happens. We're going to switch things up. I'm going to have the ref check on you to make sure you're okay, and then I'll whisper to you, it's a leg match now. I'll ground you and take care of you. Maybe work the leg or do something different if your leg hurts. You have to be able to be a great ad-libber. That's what makes a wrestler's wrestler. You have to be flexible about the way you approach the ring, said Baron von Raschke, who made his pro debut in 1966 after a successful amateur wrestling career, showing that the importance of being able to call it on the fly in wrestling is nothing new. I never knew exactly how I would react until the crowd reacted. So I reacted to the crowd. What they did made me do something to make them react more the way I wanted them to, or less the way I wanted them to. What my opponent did may or may not help or hurt that, but I tried to incorporate all these little factors. It's a lot of crowd psychology and doing the best job you can to get the story across. That was my job. Historian Steve Yohe touched on the concept indirectly in a footnote to an article he wrote on Ed Strangler Lewis. Though he didn't use the term wrestler's wrestler, his description fits nicely. There is a booking rule in pro wrestling that says the talented wrestlers can afford to do jobs and stay over, Yohe wrote. The performer types with little talent can't do many jobs without losing what the fans were willing to pay for. So you find guys in the sport like Dano Omani, Primo Carnera, Hulk Hogan. Well, I don't know if that is fair. Hogan was a smart worker and had something, but some fans perceive him as having no talent. French Angel, Antonino Rocca, Undertaker, etc., not doing jobs. As you couldn't really kill the popularity of a Chris Benoit, Hiroshi Hase, or Rey Mysterio in the 1990s by making them do jobs. The latter wrestlers, those who have the ability to remain over by virtue of their consistent work rate, are a step closer to wrestlers' wrestlers. There are some wrestlers who bristle at being called a wrestler's wrestler, however. It's a backhanded remark in my opinion, said Chris Jericho. It means somebody that's really good that never made it to the main event level. It's almost like being called a hell of a hand or a journeyman. NXT color commentator and former Ring of Honor champion Nigel McGuinness also said the term, a wrestler's wrestler, made him feel uneasy. When people refer to someone as a wrestler's wrestler, certainly when you refer to someone as a carpenter, it almost feels like a negative thing, McGuinness said. For me, there are some guys where I might think, yeah, they're good carpenters. But I would never say it because I feel that they'd say, oh, that means that I don't have the charisma to draw money or I don't have that sort of attitude in the locker room. However, for most, the term is heavy praise, especially coming from their peers. I personally find it to be the ultimate compliment, Cabana said. For me, if the art that I do is appreciated by the ones who have studied it the most and they get it, to me that means the world. If the ones who are training on it and doing it like me, then, in my head, that means the fans that I want to get it will get it. I find it a huge compliment. In this book, we have compiled the results of our interviews and research. This is not a comprehensive list of every great wrestler's wrestler ever to lace up a pair of boots. If it was, this book would likely be 2,000 pages long, and we'd still be leaving some out. Some inclusions and exclusions, nonetheless, are bound to be controversial. There are some wrestlers who have achieved success, but they were not held in particularly high regard by their peers. Some fans and historians, and a growing number of wrestlers who came after him and were influenced by him, consider Shawn Michaels to be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, because for a time, he was the best in-ring performer in WWE, if not the business as a whole. Michaels was involved in 11 matches voted as Match of the Year by readers of Pro Wrestling Illustrated between 1993 and 2010. But his backstage antics, refusals to do jobs, and unprofessional behavior, such as the notorious curtain call kayfabe-breaking incident at Madison Square Garden in 1996, and his mocking overselling of Hulk Hogan's offense at SummerSlam 2005, blemished his image with some wrestlers. Ric Flair, a proven main eventer for more than 2 decades, has critics who say his matches all follow the same script. Chops, body slam off the top rope, corner flip, flare flop, figure 4, go home. If you've seen one match, you've seen them all, they say. The Golden Greek, Jim Londos, was a huge marquee attraction during the 1930s and 40s. Thesz, one of the most respected men in wrestling, called him a thief who had run a side racket of placing bets on his own fixed matches early in his career and swindling bettors out of money. Bruiser Brody, a top star of the 1970s and 1980s in both the U.S. territories and Japan, was, in the words of Bobby Heenan, very selfish. He would screw up matches purposely and try to destroy business. While respected by many of his peers for standing up to promoters, he was known to no-sell for opponents, walk out of territories, and hold up promoters for more money if he felt he was being shortchanged. To some, that made Brody something of a folk hero. To others, he was a loose cannon. Even within the wrestling fraternity itself, the label can be challenging. From George Hackenschmidt to Kenny Omega, wrestlers will attract their fair share of admirers and critics, even among their peers. Doubtlessly, there will be listeners to decry some of the wrestlers profiled in this book, and listeners who will throw a conniption that their favorite wrestler isn't included. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. Our goal is to profile some of the wrestlers who are widely admired by their peers during their individual eras. In essence, many of the people profiled in this book are your favorite wrestlers' favorite wrestlers. Given the historic rise of women's pro wrestling over the past several years, some listeners might be surprised that only a handful of women are featured in this book. That does not reflect a bias against women's wrestling by any means. After all, Dan Murphy co-wrote Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, The History and Rise of Women's Wrestling, with Pat LaPrade. There are a few reasons why there aren't many women included. For one thing, women were mostly presented as novelty attractions in the U.S. and Canada throughout the 20th century. Mildred Burke and the Fabulous Moolah, the top 2 females from the 1930s through the 1970s, controlled their own titles and largely wrestled women they had a hand in training, often performing essentially the same match around the circuit. While popular in their day, these matches were never regarded as classics. Few wrestlers today cite either woman as an influence or someone they attempt to emulate. In all of the interviews we conducted for this book, neither Burke nor Moolah came up as an example of a wrestler's wrestler. Of course, there were some very respected women wrestlers who competed during this era, such as Judy Martin, Ella Waldeck, Vivian Vachon, and Elvira Snodgrass, to name just a few. But their influence did not extend beyond their immediate contemporaries, and therefore did not rise to the standard for this book. In the modern and post-women's revolution era, the biggest impediment for women wrestlers to be recognized as wrestlers seems to be experience. experience in terms of length of career as well as experience beyond the tightly scripted WWE style. Charlotte Flair, one of WWE's most decorated females and a headliner of WrestleMania 35, had only been wrestling for 8 years as of this writing, and only 5 years on the main roster. Regarded by some as WWE's top all-around female, she never competed outside of the WWE system. On occasions, when matches don't go exactly as planned, she often looks lost. She lacks the fluidity and versatility to improvise or change direction, which is the true hallmark of a wrestler's wrestler. Perhaps that will come with more experience and seasoning. Ronda Rousey only wrestled for 1 year before stepping away from the ring to focus on family. WWE Hall of Famers Trish Stratus and Lita only wrestled for 6 and 7 years respectively before retiring, though both returned to WWE for some matches in 2018 and 2019. Most of the wrestlers featured in the following book spent 2 decades or more perfecting their craft. To date, relatively few women have been afforded that opportunity. The women who we have included competed in multiple promotions, were versatile in different styles of wrestling, and have left a legacy that sees their work studied and imitated today. They were also mentioned by name by some of the wrestlers interviewed. If you're looking for more on women's wrestling, please check out Sisterhood of the Squared Circle. Really, you'll love it. Dan. Here is how we define a wrestler's wrestler for the purpose of this book. Believability. A true wrestler's wrestler values believability against all else. His matches look like legitimate wrestling contests or fights. Holds and strikes are stiff enough to look real to the fans in the front row without injuring his opponent. A true wrestler's wrestler presents himself as real and provides legitimacy to wrestling itself and can serve as a solid ambassador of professional wrestling with the general public. Versatility. The all-time greats can wrestle anywhere on the card, from the opening match to the main event. They can wrestle as a heel or a babyface, go for 5 minutes or 30 minutes. They understand that a wrestling card should have highs and lulls, and are versatile enough to change their game to fit to where they are slotted on the card. Adaptability. There's an old saying in wrestling that a great wrestler can work with a broom and deliver a good match. Adaptability refers to a wrestler's ability to work with any opponent, from grizzled veteran to wet behind the ears greenhorn, and to deliver a solid match every time out. In wrestling, it is widely considered to be the ultimate compliment. Respect. This refers to respect for the business of wrestling and its history, as well as respect for one's opponent. Wrestlers who treat an opponent without respect, or look at the wrestling business as a stepping stone to Hollywood, or as a flight of fancy, generally are not considered to be wrestlers. Dedication. This is closely related to respect. The wrestlers we feature in this book endeavored to master the craft of professional wrestling. They took the time to learn how to properly apply the holds, but also to transition between holds. They put in extra time and often served as mentors to their peers. They took wrestling seriously, and it shows. Aura, presence. Terry Funk, a wrestler's wrestler by any criterion, defined a wrestler's wrestler as a wrestler who continually creates an atmosphere where you have a maximum amount of people pay to see him. The guy that produces sellout after sellout. Be it by his physical size, his personality, or his in-ring demeanor, this wrestler connects with the audience in such a way that they are willing to pay to cheer for him, or pay to see him get his head kicked in. Call it charisma or star quality. When he's in the ring, fans are paying attention. Safety. Accidents happen in wrestling, as they do in any other workplace, but a true wrestler's wrestler doesn't take unnecessary liberties with his opponent. He may give out a receipt here and there, hitting a bit harder than needed after an opponent has hit him or made a dangerous mistake in the match. But these are often teaching moments designed to make an opponent slow down or get control of himself before a situation becomes dangerous. While this book is not a chronological history, we tried to organize profiles in something of a chronological order. We have included some introductory sections and breakout pieces designed to provide context and additional insight from the wrestlers interviewed for this project. Wrestling has evolved considerably from the early 1900s to today, and while the qualities of a wrestler's wrestler have not fundamentally changed during that time, they have progressed with the times, which is why grouping biographies in chronological blocks seems appropriate. Champions and legends of the past and present, insiders taking us inside, the highs and lows, the glory and the pain, the glitz and the grime, and perhaps most importantly, the truth in their own words. This project is a labor of love, but also a tribute to those who have given so much of themselves for our entertainment. Note, all quotes included in this book come from interviews conducted by the authors for this project, unless otherwise noted. Part 1. The Founding Fathers. While the history of what we now call professional wrestling has its origins in the carnival circuit, where traveling carnivals would stage exhibition matches or have a resident grappler take on challengers from the crowd, either local tough guys or plants who were in on the act, and in prize fights in the dingy back rooms of saloons and boxing gymnasiums, the first true pro wrestling star of the 20th century was the Estonian strongman Georg Hackenschmidt. Hackenschmidt was an all-around athlete, a gymnast, cyclist, strongman, and wrestler. Starting as a Greco-Roman champion, he was to become the first catch-as-catch-can wrestling star touring England, playing to sold-out crowds in theaters and music halls. Hackenschmidt was managed by the legendary showman C.B. Cochran, who not only managed and promoted the Russian Lion in England, but also managed a little-known American magician/escape artist named Harry Houdini. Cochran had a gift for showbiz. He made stars. It is said that it was Cochran who convinced Hackenschmidt to lighten up on his opponents, allowing them to last several minutes with the champ who was, in reality, able to defeat most opponents in a very short period of time. These were not fixed matches, but they could very well be where the mixing of wrestling as both sport and entertainment began. Hackenschmidt and Cochran worked the crowd to convince them that the match was a closer contest than it truly was. In a given night, Hackenschmidt might defeat up to 5 opponents, delighting the music hall patrons and drawing big houses everywhere he went. Fluent in 7 languages with a physique that looked like it was chiseled out of a block of granite, Hackenschmidt made the ladies swoon and made the men green with envy. "If I wasn't the President of the United States, I would like to be George Hackenschmidt," President Theodore Roosevelt once declared. Hackenschmidt was an athlete and an entertainer, the template for what pro wrestling would become. A 1904 match between Hackenschmidt and the Terrible Turk in London caused traffic backups that snarled traffic for miles, resulting in gridlock from the Olympia Exhibition Center to Piccadilly Circus. The Russian Lion racked up wins worldwide. He defeated American heavyweight champion Tom Jenkins in a Greco-Roman contest at Royal Albert Hall in London. He defeated Scottish heavyweight champion Alexander Monroe in Glasgow's Ibrox Park in 1905 in front of a reported crowd of between 16,000 and 20,000 spectators. After a tour of Australia, he journeyed to the U.S. for a rematch against Jenkins at Madison Square Garden, this time beating Jenkins in 2 straight falls in a catch-as-catch-can contest, bolstering his claim as wrestling's true world champion. In 1908, Hackenschmidt faced Frank Gotch, an Iowa native who had previously scored a win over Jenkins to be recognized as the top American grappler. On April 3, 1908, Gotch defeated Hackenschmidt in Chicago and was recognized as world champion, though there was no true sanctioning body to recognize the claim. The rematch was held 3 years later in Comiskey Park, Chicago, drawing 25,000 spectators and a record-setting gate of $87,000, the equivalent of $2.3 million today. Gotch won the rematch in 2 straight falls, locking in his vaunted toehold on Hackenschmidt and threatening to break his foot. Hack rolled to his back to be counted down. Though it wasn't widely known at the time, the Russian Lion came into the rematch with an injured right knee. But given all of the tickets sold and the international hype dubbing the bout the fight of the century, Hackenschmidt wrestled despite the injury and went down easily to his American opponent. Gotch retired as champion in 1913, the first of several retirements. But even though he had vanquished Hack, he still had his critics. He was regarded by some, including Lou Thesz, as a bully, someone who would gouge.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?